Cursor just launched a coding AI that matches Claude Opus 4.7 on several key benchmarks. Let's take a look. This comes from BridgeMind on X, and we can see that Composer 2.5 has kind of jumped the line in terms of overall metrics here. We can see that the new version is now exceeding, it's about on par, if not exceeding, Opus 4.7, and it's getting pretty close to Codex, GPT 5.5. So that's a huge improvement there, and it comes at a fraction of the cost of Opus 4.7, as we know, is one of the more expensive coding platforms around. We're talking about 50 cents per million input tokens versus $5 for Opus 4.7. So for engineering teams who are running long automated coding sessions, that price gap just doesn't just save money, it actually changes the entire ecosystem of what's feasible. So a quick bit of context on what Cursor is. It is an AI-powered code editor. It's basically like VS Code, if you're familiar with that, but with a kind of a deeper AI layer built into it. So for a while, its main selling point for users was that it used frontier models from Anthropic, OpenAI to essentially power those AI features. You pay for Cursor, and Cursor is more of the interface, kind of like VS Code, but then you also have to pay Anthropic and OpenAI in order to use that actual intelligence behind it. And that setup worked fine, but it created sort of a structural problem. The same labs Cursor was paying for model access, Anthropic and OpenAI, were also building and selling their own competing coding tools directly to developers. So like Claude Code, which is, of course, Anthropic's coding agent, had already crossed $2.5 billion in annualized revenue and more than 300,000 business customers by early 2026. So Cursor was essentially helping fund its own competition for a while. So they started building their own models, and Composer 2 had launched in March of this year, followed by 2.5, which just came out. Now, what is Composer 2.5 actually? So the base model it uses is Kimi, which we have a video on that you can check out. But Kimi 2.5 is an open source checkpoint from Moonshot AI, which is a Beijing-based company. It's a 1 trillion parameter mixture of experts model, which sounds enormous, but because of how mixture of experts architecture works, only about 32 billion parameters are actually active on any given interface pass. So that's what makes it cheaper to run than your Claude Opus, for example. Now let's dig into the benchmarks a little deeper here. So on the SWE-Bench Multilingual, which is probably the most widely respected external benchmark for this kind of task, it measures how well a model resolves real GitHub issues across multiple programming languages. Composer scores really, really well here. So it's just under Claude Opus with about a 79.8% score versus Claude Opus 80.5%. So more or less that's a tie, right? That's within a percentage. On Cursor's own in-house benchmark called SWE-Bench version 3.1, which this tests multi-file under-specified tasks designed to feel like real IDE work. On Cursor's own in-house benchmark called SWE-Bench version 3.1, we can see that Composer 2.5 scores about a 63%, while Opus is decently under that, about 61%, and then GPT scores down at 59%. So on Cursor's own test, their model actually comes out ahead. Now the cost math is what makes all this interesting in practice. Cursor's own data shows Composer 2.5 is running at about 50 cents on their benchmark versus Opus 4.7 at a comparable accuracy runs at around $7. So if you're a team who's running hundreds of automated coding sessions in a day, that math changes the whole conversation about what's worth automating. Now there's one significant gap here I think is worth pointing out, and that's the Terminal Bench 2.0, which tests shell-driven agent workflows. On that front, GPT is still the hands-on leader, 82%. Composer 2.5 scored down at about a 69%. So that's a 13-point gap, which is it does matter, right? If your workload is heavily terminal native, that's going to make a difference. Now for the training techniques. The problem Cursor was out to solve is when you train an AI agent on long coding tasks, a session can span hundreds of thousands of tokens, right? We all know this from using Claude Code and Codex. If something goes wrong early in that session and the agent eventually fails the task, how does that model learn which specific decision caused the failure? The reward signal at the end of the session is too noisy. It just says, oh, that didn't work, not the problem was this specific tool callback 200 steps in the past. So Cursor's approach was to insert corrective hints directly at the point of the session where the model made a bad decision. So instead of waiting for the end reward, the system identifies where the model went wrong, puts a short hint into that local context, something like a reminder, here are the tools actually available to you. And then it uses the improved output from that hinted version as a training signal for the unhinted version. And one more thing about this that didn't get a lot of coverage, but I think it changes the long-term picture overall, and that's that SpaceX announced in April that it had secured the right to acquire Cursor for $60 billion, or pay $10 billion for a joint development arrangement as part of a deal to train a much larger Cursor model from scratch using roughly 10 times more compute than Composer 2.5. The compute cluster involved is Colossus 2, which has a million H100 equivalent GPUs. That's a lot. Composer 2.5, by Cursor's own description, is the bridge model. So it's capable and it's cheap enough to use today while the next generation build is underway. So let's talk about what this means for different groups of people. If you're a developer who's already using Cursor, I think your immediate takeaway is going to be, wow, Composer 2.5 is crushing all these benchmarks. It's cheaper to use than Claude Opus 4.7 through the API. And for routine multi-file tasks and under specified work inside an IDE, the quality is competitive with Claude Opus. If you're doing token-heavy, agentic sessions, long runs, multi-step refactoring, this could mean that you're going to significantly reduce your costs. And Cursor is also doubling included usage for the first week after launch. So now is a low friction time to actually jump in and test it. And now if you're someone who's building AI-powered developer tooling, the signal from Composer 2.5 is that proprietary fine-tuned models built on open source bases are closing the gap with API-only approaches, much faster than I think most people expected a couple years ago. Now, if you're a developer evaluating it for your production pipelines, especially unattended, automated runs, the answer might be to wait just a little bit and kind of see, maybe test it on a few projects first and kind of wait to see how this evolves. Make sure to perform some independent testing in production settings before you commit. So I think the broader story around all this is that the AI coding market is fragmenting faster than the major labs would probably prefer. Cursor is no longer just a consumer of other models. They're now a direct competitor, which is pretty amazing. And now with the SpaceX partnership backing, the sky's the limit, no pun intended. So if this kind of content is useful to you, please leave a like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.